Hey guys, we're here today covering the Salamence ban. Now I know I was going to have a Wi-Fi battle today, but I actually decided to change the order of things because I wanted to sort of segue into the men's Wi-Fi battle that we're going to be doing anyway, which is going to be going up tomorrow. So if you are interested in figuring out how you could still use Salamence even after this ban in OU, leave a like below and subscribe, finish out the video of course, and then check back tomorrow at 9 o'clock where you can see us showcase how to use Ments in OU. But with that said, first things first, I want to break this video into a couple of different parts. First, going over some really good Salamence sets that some of which got banned in UU, and other sets are just really good to use in OU. Truthfully, they're all kind of applicable here. You can use them all in OU pretty successfully to various degrees. So yeah, with that said, after that, we're going to break down some teams and why Salamence fits in those, as well as going over the partners on those teams that really benefit Ments. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy it. And with that said, let's start off with the first set being DD Salamence, which is Dragon Claw, Dragon Dance, Earthquake, and Roost. Now basically, this is your standard Salamence. No real, complicated EVs about it, just meant to be max speed and max attack for the simplest experience possible, with Moxie to try and make it a terrifying sweeper. Usually with Salamence, because of how bad the speed tiers are in BDSP OU, let alone UU, this is able to just get to +1 and then start completely destroying teams. One of the best steals in the tier being Metagross and the other one being Magneton, neither of which really appreciate taking on the Salamence, which in general means that Salamence had a pretty free time, especially with the fact that Clefable, which is one of the best fairies that we even have access to, is an OU, and the next best option would be something like a Gardevoir or a Granbull, both of which definitely have various degrees of success against Pokemon, with Gardevoir having the recovery aspect through Wish, and Granbull having the Intimidate, which at least helps take on physical sets. However, physical Salamence was not the only set, and we'll have a couple others that are not just physical down the road. But I wanted to go over next a bit of a more complicated, I guess, to an extent, DD Ments. This is Mono Fly, and this is mostly just a function similar to how Mono Fly Dragonite works in OU, where you're going to spam Fly reliably, and you'll try and set up to +6 of this one typically, or at least +4, some extreme Dragon Dance amount, and then try and go for the sweep. Now this could, to be fair, be Intimidate just as easily to try and allow you to sweep, but the ability doesn't really matter here. The point is, again, it's just to give Ments an option to sweep. This would be typically put on teams that maybe struggle with grass types or fighting types or stuff like that, where Ments could end up being the check to those Pokemon. But it really depends. Though, truthfully, just with the 3 attacks, you could also just run a 3 attacks DD Ments. However, personally, I would put this the lowest in the totem pole because I like having Roost in my Ments personally. I think it helps a lot with keeping this thing around for the long game to really get multiple chances of setting up a sweep. Next up, though, we have Spec Salamence. Now, any longtime viewers of the channel, or even just one other time viewers of the channel, have probably seen me use Spec Ments at one point or another. This is personally my favorite Salamence set, actually, which is kind of weird because I never really cared for any special Ments before this gen, but now this is my favorite set. I love just clicking Specs Draco or Specs Hydro Pump and Specs Fire Blast, which truthfully just hit so much really well. You're able to pretty much hit everything with this. For example, Fire Blast is great for steals, which are common switch instruments. Hydro Pump is great for grounds too, so stuff like your Hippowdons or your Gliscors are both going to get hit really hard. Hippowdon more so for the UU aspect, because I believe Hippowdon was UU. If not, I mean, it's still good for grounds in general, stuff like Donphan, which was at the time UU at the very least. And yeah, we see Hippowdon was in UU as well, so it was great for something like that. So you can just get the reliable hit off on it, and then switch out later on to fire off a Specs Draco. Though to be fair, you could probably just click Specs Draco against Hippowdon anyway, as long as it's not Spit F. Regardless though, the 3 attacks hit so many different Pokemon really well, and Dragon Pulse is really just here if you want an earlier on option to click for a Dragon move, because you're not always wanting to drop your special attack by 2 stages. Whether you're cleaning up late game and you only need to deal 40% to every single Pokemon left, or you just want to make sure that you can hit and then not be forced out by a potential setup sweeper, Dragon Pulse is still a really good option to be clicking on a Specs Ments. With this set, you definitely want to go with Intimidate. This is probably one of the only sets, well, one of 2 sets being the other defensive, where you really do want the specific ability. Both the Dragon Dance Ments could easily just as well function with Intimidate because it does force switches, whereas Moxie is enabling to break quicker. So it depends on how you want to go about it, but Intimidate is pretty much the only good ability on special Ments because your only other choice is the Moxie. There's not like a third ability, whereas some other Pokemon just have 3. Ments only has 2, so you really only want to go with Intimidate here. Final mon, though, we're going to go over for Ments is defensive. Now, these sets are typically the defogging Mentses, which I personally like a lot. It has Roost, Defog, Flamethrower, and Draco Meteor. Draco Meteor and Flamethrower hit phenomenally well, to be fair. And you don't really need a flying option on the set. Truthfully, though, I think that's partially just because of the fact that you can't even run Hurricane in this gen, which is very sad, actually. But regardless, even if you could, I think the Flamethrower is still probably the better option here on the defensive Ments at the very least. Now, you can make a case that maybe Hurricane's better on specs, but on defensive at least, Flamethrower is a way to go because you don't really have an option to hit steals otherwise, and they're going to come in on you pretty easily. Stuff like a Metagross, for example, could come in pretty effortlessly on this and then set up Stealth Rocks if you didn't have Flamethrower, whereas Flamethrower gives the chance to burn, which helps you only more easily take it on. So in general, this is a pretty good Ments just in general to check stuff like fighting types in the tier. There are a decent amount of them. For example, obviously you have stuff like Hariyama in UU, as well as I believe Machamp actually is like tiered UU. No, I don't actually know what fighting types are tiered UU, but I know there are a lot of fighting types that are possible at the very least. Heracross is a big one. You could obviously check this as long as it's not clicking Facade. But I guess there's really not a lot of fighting types, probably because of stuff like Mew, for example, and Cress. But regardless, though, I mean, it's still a great fighting check for teams. It's still a great grass check because you can still Flamethrower them, so you don't even need the fly. So yeah, regardless, this is a really good physical switch into stuff, and Roost helps make that even better. So in terms of teams with Ments, let's go over teams that I've used in the past, actually. I will go over sets that worked really well and why they did. So first off, of course, Specs Ments team. This was actually the Choice Band and Entei video, if you guys checked that out. But basically, the purpose of the team was to try and make the job for Ments as easily as possible because it's just such a free Pokemon. So stuff like Entei, for example, on this team with the Choice Band, basically, it's the best Steel Killer you can really get, which means that Draco is a much clickable option. You don't need to lock in Flamethrower necessarily because you can just click it with your Band and Fire type. We also have stuff like Metagross, which is a Fairy Killer here, really good with Spit Off Metagross with the added nature just to optimize the attack a bit more, because you're still hitting hard with this, but you don't really need to go max Spit Off or anything. Just meant to take hits for the long term. So Meteor Mash is great just to click to kill those fairy types like Gardevoir and Granbull, for example, because they don't really do a lot back. Well, Gardevoir, I guess, could run Shadow Ball, and I guess Granbull could run Earthquake. But at the very least, though, you're still able to definitely take them on, at least to various degrees, especially with the fact that you have Clear Body, so Intimidate Granbull doesn't even work back on you, which is great. You have stuff like Blastoise, which is great for the spinning aspect because you're not defogging with this Ments. And then you have stuff like Rotom-Mow, which is great because this Rotom-Mow set with Hex actually is great for Metagross, which means, again, it's killing a steal that you don't need to worry about with Salamence. And finally, Spirit Team's really just here to take advantage of all the status and then be annoying with Hex. So the next Salamence team I want to break down actually features a defensive Salamence, and this was yet again another UU team. I'm going through the UU ones first, and then I'm going to go over the OU ones, so in case that wasn't a bit clear by the second team, now you know. So with this team, we have defensive Ments, which on the purpose here is mostly just for Ments to be a physical check to a lot of different physical threats. One of the big things, this was made a bit earlier in the meta, so Bird and I had personally thought that Machamp was going to be really good. So it's a really good check to fighting types like that, for example, albeit Stone Edge is a bit annoying, but you can always Roost since you do outpace. Other UU Pokemon this set is really good against is stuff like Entei, for example, because it really can only damage you with Stone Edge. If we go through the tier a bit more, obviously stuff like, for example, Metagross does struggle a bit to beat you, especially with the fact that you have Intimidate. Well, not necessarily Intimidate, but Flamethrower plus Roost is able to really beat that pretty well. So just other stuff like that. Though I will say UU, to be fair, is a pretty special tier. Defensive Ments still definitely has a purpose. It's just being a bulky Pokemon, because the typing provides actually a lot of resistances. And I feel like a lot of people forget that, but Dragon resists a lot of typings. All the starter typings plus Electric, albeit this set specifically, well, the type combination specifically is neutral to Electric, but it has a 4 times to Grass, a 2 times to Fire, a 2 times to Water, also it's a 2 times to Fighting, a Ground Immunity. This has so many different resistances. So Ments is really good just at being a check in general to a lot of physical stuff, or even just special stuff, but better against physical stuff, to be fair. We have Porygon Z in this team, which these two together just needed the Steel Killer, which is why we have Machamp and Nidoqueen, as well as Magneton to trap steals. So the purpose was really just to get a sweeping option with either Porygon Z or just to endgame with Ments, where the team just couldn't break it anymore. And then we have the Mega, which is really just here to kill grasses. Also just really good specs Pokemon. Bird and I just wanted to run dual specs on this team, so yeah, Mega's kind of just an extra option here, in my opinion. But maybe there's something I'm spacing on. I really don't think it has too much of a purpose other than just existing. But really, these back three are just the Steel Killers for stuff like Ments and Porygon Z. And also, these two can kind of overwhelm checks for each other, because Ments can use Flamethrower to get past stuff for Draco, and Porygon Z could probably just fire off stuff like Shadow Balls for stuff like Metagross, and do a ton of damage with that. So they do pair well with each other, in my opinion, by clearing each other's counterplay. So now I want to get into the OU Salamences, and let's start with the Abandoned the Never Melt Ice Mamoswine team. I forget if this was actually an Aussie feature or a Mamoswine feature, but I'm 80% sure this was Mamoswine. Regardless, though, it is still really good because we have Mamoswine and OU, which is great for clearing steals that are not the name Scizor. Stuff like Magnezone, for example, will fold this Pokemon pretty quickly. We have our own Scizor, which is obviously really good for opposing dragons, as well as Azu, which can at least offensively pressure dragons. We have stuff like Raikou, which is just really good pivot into Ments. And then on this team, sadly, I will say we have a bit of a scissor issue. However, it's not a big issue because we have Fire Blast and Ments, because this is yet again another Specs Ments team. So a lot of teams will think, oh, you know, my Scissor can kind of just wall this team out. Nope, we have Specs Salamence, and it's going to take advantage of the Scissors very effortlessly because of Intimidate and Fire Blast. So it's a huge thing out of our way. With Hydro Pump, as mentioned, this is great for Hippowdon, which was a huge threat in UU, and still, I've actually seen the Hippo team on ladder, thanks to Bird. He showed me a few screenshots, so I know some of you were using it. So it's great for those Hippos on that Hippo team, as well as also for Gliscor. So obviously, it's really good for those sort of ground types that would normally be switched into physical dragons. So in general, this Ments is really benefited here by a lot of these Pokemon. We have Roserade obviously just to set up spikes, which makes the Ments endgame with specs easier, even if just breaking sashes or just wearing down checks. It really helps a lot with the Ments endgame here. So I like this team a lot, actually. It's really, really good around Ments, and it's probably the one I think that benefits Ments the most, in my opinion. So the next team we have is actually the Blissey team. That's right, we have everyone's favorite Lord Blissey with Banded Metagross. These two were a really fun combination to use, actually. I'm not gonna lie, I had way more fun using this than I should have. But regardless, so we have the Rotom Wash defensive background, which is a great pivot into Salamence. We have Metagross, which is a phenomenal Fairy Killer, especially with the Choice Band. We have Clefable, which is a great Dragon switch in, as well as actually a pretty good Dragon lure because of Life of Calm Mind. Most dragons might think they could take a hit before the boost, but then Moonblast comes out and just deals way more damage than it should be doing. Then we obviously have Blissey, which is meant to just be a special sponge to stuff like, for example, Lottie. If it's like locked in Draco, it could actually take over that role, switching in for Clef. If we know if it's not Psyshock, it should be able to easily take advantage of that. I know your Tangrowth, which is really just here, I believe is just a ground check, really. Also, just in general, it's a really good Fizz Def wall with regen, and the fact that we have Pivot with Rotom, as well as just stuff like Clefable and Blissey, we're pretty fine with having our nice bulky core out here. And then, as I said, Metagross is great for dragons. And then we have this set being a Dragon Dance Ment, which means that we need to bank on Rotom on this team, mostly for the grounds, as well as Tangrowth, but the two of them should be able to take out stuff. Like Tangrowth, for example, is easy for Hippo, and also can probably take a single hit from Garchomp. It has Airlace for Breloom, which could also be an issue for Sporing, because this isn't a sub-DD Ment, so that takes that possibility even out of the way. Also just means that we can just raw attack, because if we kill Breloom, we don't have to worry about stuff like, for example, Technician Rock Tomb as well. So it takes out any sort of guessing game against Breloom by just having such a good Fizz Def check in Tangrowth. So that's also really useful for Tangrowth in this team. And then Rotom Wash is great for stuff like Gliscor, for example, because it pretty much hard walls it, and then Hydro Pump should nail it. So this Ments is a really good set of support pieces, albeit I like the Mammo team a bit better around Ments personally, especially around the set that we did use for Ments there being Specs. But the DD Ments here does still have some uses. Obviously, unlike something like a Garchomp, for example, DD Ments can actually boost its speed, and you don't have to just lock into moves for getting that +1 speed advantage, so it does have some uses there. And then I guess on the Specs end, since I didn't mention that earlier, but Specs Ments has a lot better coverage than Lottie. For example, Lottie does not have a great way to damage stuff like Scizor and T-Tar, whereas Ments has two phenomenal ways to damage them with Hydro Pump and Fire Blast. So, albeit to be fair, physical Ments obviously will always handle T-Tar better, but it's still a good way to hit it. It's more so for the Scizor metric though, because again, Lottie can't really touch Scizor. But let's get into the final team now. So this final team is actually the Crawdon team, and this personally I liked a lot. We have Crawdon obviously to fill the ground metric for killing stuff like Gliscor and Hippowdon. And we have Roserade, which is great for the spikes. It's also a really good Fairy Killer. We have Gardevoir, which is our Fairy choice here, which I actually like a lot because it gives the Trick Room aspect for Crawdon and Rhyperior to actually break checks to Ments easier. And with Rhyperior, this is really useful, mostly just for trying to take on other grounds because we have Ice Fang, and we're going to be able to, at least with Solrock, take a hit pretty well. And under Trick Room, we can actually probably beat stuff like Garchomp pretty effortlessly with this. We have Heatran, which is our Fairy Checker choice in this team outside of Roserade, but the two in tandem should check pretty much every Fairy. Obviously, with Roserade, we do worry about stuff like Calm Mind Clef. However, Heatran really has no concern over that, because even if it's Calm Mind Recovery with like Flamethrower and Moonblast, it's really not going to do any damage because we have Flash Fire here. So it helps patch up that one weakness that maybe Roserade could have actually succumbed to if we didn't get it in time. And then obviously Salamence, this is a defensive Ments, which is great for checking fighting types in the team for stuff like Rhyperior, Heatran, and Crawdon. Specifically Infernape, which is actually a huge issue for this team, which Salamence can pretty easily wall and then recover up on, especially with Intimidate handling any physical Infernape, I should say. And then Special Infernape doesn't really have any way to damage this, because Physical's best way would be something like a Thunder Punch or a Stone Edge, and Special just doesn't have a good way. Outside of maybe like a Will-O-Wisp, I guess, but this is Special as well, so we don't even need to worry about Will-O-Wisp Infernape. But yeah, that's it. So I will say there is a specific Ment that I'm saving later, which is actually Mixed Dragon Dance, which I'm saving the team specifically because that is actually the team I'm showcasing tomorrow. But I do think that Mixed Dragon Dance will personally be the best set to use in OU, outside of maybe Specs, which again, I think actually has a huge merit in OU and it's pretty underutilized. But hopefully you guys do enjoy. And if you enjoyed the video and learned something new, leave a like below. I didn't mention it at the beginning, but I'll probably edit something on screen at least. But the comment question of the day today is, what was your favorite mend set to use in UU if you played it? Or if you didn't play UU, what was your favorite mend set to use? What's going to be your favorite mend set to use in OU? I'd love to see your answers down below. And with that said, I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out, guys.